Welcome back to the 15th online episode of Peacetime, hosted on alternating Sunday mornings by PeacePoint and on alternating Thursday evenings by DIMC Information, with myself, Prime Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from Dhammakaya International Meditation Center in Azusa, California. Today's session will be about an hour and 10 minutes long and will consist of a 25-minute talk and 20 minutes of meditation, finishing up with 25 minutes of conclusion, answers to viewer questions submitted in advance, and news updates. Last time you saw me, we looked at cultivating contentment to overcome greed in the mind. The topic for the Dhamma talk today will be transcending craving and sensuality. Again, this session I would encourage you to send in any questions you have by emailing me at peacetime.questions@gmail.com so that I can have a shot at answering them next time round. Since we've already dealt with greed last session, you might ask yourself why we are spending another session looking at sensuality, which is also a form of desire. The reason why we are treating it separately is because of the very different way it is overcome. Last session, we saw how greed for things without end was dealt with by contentment with what we have, what we get, or what is appropriate. However, for sensuality, as we shall see, we cannot overcome it simply by being content with it. We cannot overcome it by indulging in it. We cannot even overcome it by repressing it. The only alternative remaining for us, as we shall see, is to overcome it by transcending it, by attaining the sort of inner happiness which is superior. I should warn you in advance that the subject matter for today, even more than my usual talks, really goes against the grain of thinking in Western society. In the old days after giving this talk, there would be very few students returning the next week, so it is not a talk that I would expect to boost my YouTube ratings. Generally speaking, we tend to think of sensuality in terms of romantic love. But when speaking of defilements in the mind, the context of sensuality is broader than that. It may come from the seemingly innocuous things like listening to nice music, enjoying a glass of wine, or getting a massage. If this is the entire source of fulfillment in your life, then all these things are in fact hooks of sentimentality, which are preventing your mind from coming to the center. So today's talk is a little bit about how to become more aware of the things which perhaps we still have our obsessions with, and suggest ways to transcend these for the benefit of our meditation. Why should we want to give up sensual pleasure in the first place when it is so strongly encouraged in our modern materialistic world? Well, doesn't it help us to keep us young and spontaneous? Sensuality, in fact, has several built-in dangers. The first problem with sensuality is it is never satiated and gives diminishing returns. Like many sorts of addiction, you can never know enough of it. If you start to develop a taste for something, you want to have that thing over and over again, whether it be chocolate or cigars. Not only does it fail to give you the same thrill the second time round, but you need to have more of the same thing in order to get the same satisfaction. So it tends to be a slippery slope if you are reliant on those sense pleasures to give you enjoyment in life. Secondly, because the things involved with sensual pleasure are generally external to yourself, then they never are fully under your own control. If you fall in love with a certain special someone, there's nothing to stop other people falling in love with them too. But for you, that can be very upsetting. A situation where you're not loved back by the person who you love, triggering violent feelings of jealousy. And the reason for that is that the feelings that other person has for you are never fully under your control anyway. They have a mind of their own. There is no cosmic law to guarantee that because you have strong feelings for a person, that they're going to love you back. Although they can never be under your control, but if you realize that from the outset, then it might save you from disappointment at a later date, because you realize that that's just the nature of life. Just because you like a particular guy or girl doesn't mean that they're going to be yours for eternity. The third thing is that you're playing with fire. The sort of emotions involved with sensuality create such strong emotions that if these emotions are thwarted or unrequited, then it can cause major emotional whiplash. There are lots of examples of people who have a nervous breakdown because of romance gone wrong. From what initially seems like a desirable emotion, it can turn into something very destructive, just because of a small change in circumstances. It's like moths playing in a candle flame. For sensuality, once it's over with, it causes us sorrow. Sorrow is a dry sort of feeling in the mind where you want to cry, but you don't have any tears left to cry anymore. It's a part of our human condition, but if we're smart enough, we can minimize our exposure to it. And last but not least, sensuality becomes a source of worry, because once you have a strong bond with something, then you're worrying about when it's going to end. It might be for people, or it might be for your dog or cat. You can see some people who are distraught for weeks at a time when their dog is terminally sick. Really, if they weren't so attached in the first place, they could really save themselves a lot of worries. I'm not saying that you should not love your dog, cat, or even your partner, but you have to find a way of loving where sensuality doesn't get in under your skin. In other words, being able to love things or people without getting clingy. At this point, it's probably important to point out that what I'm advocating today is not neglecting love for your family, denying aesthetics, or selfishly running away from the things that might eventually hurt you. So let's look at some example of skillful and less skillful attitudes to appreciating art and to loving your family. There is a fine line to be drawn between aesthetics and sensuality. To give the example of appreciating art, if you were a person overcome by sensuality, when visiting an art gallery, you would just want to own every painting you saw there, especially the nude portraits and sculptures. If you weren't able to get your regular fix of art, you might get really mad. If you have let sensuality get its claws in so far, then it has to be this particular thing and not another one, and then it's putting you at risk of potential anger and unskillful states of mind. If you were a little bit less obsessed with the sensuality of art, you would be able to go into a gallery and just enjoy the art without wanting to own it, all the paintings there. You would just take pleasure merely in the chance to see a good art collection, picking up on the general energy to put you in a good mood for your meditation. And if the art is not available, then you'll be able to shift onto something else quite happily. The most positive attitude to art is to allow paintings to inspire you to see something beyond. So if you look enough at paintings by J.M.W. Turner, or maybe Monet's Rouen Cathedral series or Mark Rothko's large canvases, you realize the artist is referring to something beyond what's in the paintings. Turner's Snowstorm, Steamboat off a harbour's mouth, is not just a painting of a ship in the mist, but is something more of a presence there, which indicates something beyond this world, which may actually awaken you to some sort of spirituality in yourself. And that's not attachment at all. In this way, appreciating art can be a fundamental part of your spiritual life, as a way to honor your senses, treasure them, and expose your senses selectively to things that are uplifting for the mind. And it's also important that I debunk the idea that if you shun sensuality, that you'll no longer be able to love members of your family. It's worth pointing out that there is good and bad attachment. And when we talk about sensual attachment to things, it means your gratification is coming from owning or possessing something. But supposing you have a bond between a mother and a child, that bond is by its nature one whereby both the mother and the child can use to become better people. The word love in English is rather vague and sometimes confusing. The possible meanings of love are clarified by a book written back in 1960 by the British writer and theologian C.S. Lewis, who you probably know better for the Narnia stories. Lewis tells us that even in the Christian Bible, there are 4 different kinds of love, which are given entirely different names in ancient Greek. One sort of love needs to be treated with care, while the other three are positive and to be encouraged. The potentially harmful sensual love is known in Greek as eros. This is romantic love or need love. It is a form of love that can be perverted by pride and fall into depravity when pure love is corrupted by presuming itself to be what it is not. As for three positive types of love or gift love, there is agape, which is unconditional love. There is philia, which is a bond of friendship, and storge, which is the bond of empathy. It is said that to truly know the world, we have to love it in these three ways. So, the unconditional bond of empathy and friendship between parent and child is not one of sensual attachment, but a connection which gives leverage for both the parent and the child to become better people. The parent gets to practice love and parental care, while learning a lot about themselves from taking care of a child. The child certainly learns a lot because they get brought up by the parent. Maybe they see it as a good example of someone who is really altruistic, who they can learn from at later in life. So there is a bond, but we wouldn't call that an attachment. If a parent loves a child enough, they have to learn to let the child go, in keeping with the practice of equanimity that we've mentioned in earlier sessions that has a firm foundation in Buddhist tradition. We try to be analytical in these sessions, and sensuality has two components. The problem with sensuality occurs when the two components come into contact with one another. So, what are these two components? Firstly, there are the sensual objects, such as attractive sights for the eyes, charming music for the ears, nice aromas for the nose, delicious taste for the taste buds, or comfortable sensations for the skin. Sense objects are like an unignited match head. Secondly, there are the subjective components of desire. Subjective components of sensuality are located in the mind. When the object and the subjective component of sensuality meet up, they are like a match head hitting the striker on a matchbox. When contact is made, then we run the risk of becoming a slave to our craving. Matches in themselves are not dangerous until they get struck with unskillful emotions flaring up in the mind. If you have the potential defilements in your mind under control, then you could be around a lot of beautiful things or people and you could enjoy them without wanting to possess them, which to me seems more like freedom than having to worry about obtaining and maintaining those things. Craving can occur on at least 4 levels, and I'll tell you a little story to illustrate the first 3 of these. So, once upon a time there was a guy who really wanted a sausage. So he was granted 3 wishes by a genie or whatever. He used up his first wish to get a sausage, but he still wasn't contented. He wanted something special to happen to the sausage, which was, he wanted the sausage to stick on his wife's nose. So he had the craving to be things. It was not craving for a particular object, but it was craving for a certain state. Once his second wish came true and he got his sausage stuck on his wife's nose, he realized he'd been foolish and he no longer wanted a wife with a sausage on her nose. So he had to use up his final wish so that it should not be so anymore, at which point the sausage disappeared and his wife was returned to normal. The moral of this story was something like, be careful for what you wish for. The equivalent to wanting a sausage is the most basic form of sensuality, which is the craving to get physical things. This is the thirst for having or getting things that tempts the senses. It is attachment to look at beautiful pictures, smell pleasant perfumes, or to touch soft things. Even thinking of such pleasures from the past or in the future is counted as sensual pleasure. Such attachments are like time bombs that may cause you problems of obsession sometime in the future. The desire for the sausage to stick on the wife's nose is equivalent to the second sort of sensuality, which is the craving for things to be. At a superficial level, it might mean wanting to be something or other. It's like an elementary school kid who wants to grow up to be a high school kid so they can get a bigger allowance. However, when they get what they have been craving for, it's very rarely as satisfying as they imagined. The desire for the sausage no longer to stick on the wife's nose is the third sort of sensuality, which is the craving for things no longer to be. At the superficial level, it means wanting not to be something or other. For example, when you're still an employee in someone else's company, you may have had the craving to start your own company, which is the sensuality to be things. But as soon as you manage to start your own company, you find that you have bitten off more than you can chew. Now you never have any free time because you have to be responsible for everything from your employees to the accounts. Therefore, you think of the old days when you were just an employee without so many responsibilities and decide to sell up. You put the business on the market, but no one shows any interest in buying it. You'd like to liquidate the company, but you can't because there are too many debts. This is when you have the craving not to be something anymore. A fourth sort of craving, which the man with the sausage failed to discover, may occur if you go further in meditation. It can happen when you manage to transcend sense pleasure and you start to touch upon subtle states of mind. However, you're still not out of the woods as far as craving is concerned, because you can get attached to meditation states as well. If one grasps onto things which one has attained in meditation, then it stops you going any further than that. Some people meditate and they attain a feeling of lightness as if they're floating above their cushion. In some meditation schools, they even encourage that. But once you attach onto that experience, although it's something which doesn't come to you via the external senses, but it holds you back from making further progress, because that's as far as you ever get in any future meditation. It's a little bit more esoteric than being attached to things external to yourself, because in theory you could conjure up such a meditation experience whenever you want it. But it holds you back because you're not completely free of subtle attachments yet. Sometimes breaking free of sensuality is compared to a person cast overboard in the ocean, and they're going to drown unless they have something to cling on to. And even if there's a corpse of someone who's already drowned floating past, given the choice between drowning and clinging onto this bloated corpse to keep yourself afloat, even though it's disgusting to you, then I'm sure you would choose to cling on to the corpse. This is said to be the equivalent to clinging on to our own beauty and kidding ourselves that we're going to be young forever, even though deep down inside we know our life expectancy can be no longer than 75 years. But if a plank comes floating along, then you'll be pretty quick to let go of the corpse and grab onto the plank instead, because a plank is a little bit more reliable than a corpse, which may sink at any time. But if you then saw a raft come floating along, then you would let go of the plank in order to get on the raft. But if the raft brought you to dry land, then you don't have any risks of being at sea anymore. Of course, you would abandon the raft at that point. And this is again rather like the sequence of upgrading attachments. Just as a drowning person wouldn't let go of a corpse until they saw the plank, in the same way you would have a hard time convincing people to give up enjoying themselves if they've never experienced any benefits from meditation. Because the number of people who have experience of meditation is still limited, most people feel they would be foolish to let go of ephemeral pleasure in order to find some elusive esoteric pleasure. In spiritual practice, the idea is to get to the meditational equivalent of dry land, where you have the source of fulfillment in life which is reliable, which can be truly your refuge. So, speaking of such a refuge, at this time, we settle ourselves for some meditation ourselves. So if you'd like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself now, as you listen to my instructions. So, if you'd like to close your eyes very gently and find a comfortable position for yourself in meditation, and we take a few deep breaths to ourselves, breathing into the full extent of our lungs, and then breathing slowly and smoothly out again. Once again, we breathe the cool, refreshing air from around us. As we breathe out, we may feel that we're letting go of any worries and concerns which we previously had in our lives. From there, we take a few moments to adjust our posture and to make a scan down through the whole of our body, relaxing each and every muscle as we go. So relaxing the muscles of our forehead, our eyebrows and eyelids, double checking to make sure that the way we've closed our eyes is as gentle as possible. Never squeezing our eyes closed, closing our eyes in just the same way we might close them to go to sleep. Allowing the muscles of our face to become soft. Relaxing our jaw, taking special care not to clench our teeth together. Relaxing our neck and letting our shoulders drop to their natural height. Relaxing our arms, forearms, and then our hands and fingers. So that even the way our hands rest in our lap is as light and gentle as possible. Continuing on down, we relax all the muscles of our torso, chest, trunk, and our abdomen. And relaxing both legs all the way down to our feet and our toes. Till at a certain point we feel satisfied that no remaining part of our body has any sort of stress or tension anymore. If we do notice anywhere where tension still lingers on, we do our best to relax it as far as possible. Almost to the point that our body seems to melt away into the atmosphere around us. So we have no more worries about our body anymore, allowing us to turn our attention inward to focus instead on the feeling inside us. A sense of warmth, well-being, inner space, that by any other name we could call our state of mind. And in order to empty up a space inside ourselves for the meditation, we put aside any worries about our studies, work, friends, family, any regrets from our past, or any plans for the future, so that we are settled 100% in the present moment and on the task in hand. And to set the scene for our meditation, we conjure up a sense of happiness and joy in the mind. If that doesn't come naturally to us, we can maybe cast our mind back to a time in our lives when we felt truly happy. Conjuring up that same feeling all over again, until we have a warm, fuzzy feeling inside us. We allow that feeling to grow and spread inside ourselves. Until there's no space left inside us for any other sort of thought. And when we feel relaxed, both in body and in mind, very gently, using no effort at all, We imagine our whole body to be nothing but an empty space or a hollow cavity with no organs or tissues, muscles, or bones. Or instead, you might imagine your body to have been transformed into a sort of transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. And when you're ready, again, very gently, using no effort at all, remember back to that picture of the bright, shining sun which you had a few moments ago. Maybe yellow or golden in color, white or red. Doesn't matter if the actual picture is not as clear as you normally see it with your eyes. Even if it's fake, accept it anyway. There may be some people who feel the warmth of the sun but don't actually see it. Again, you can use that tactile sense of warmth as the object of your meditation. And in this case, we allow that bright picture or that feeling of warmth to make its way gently downwards inside the space of our body, almost as if we were gradually breathing it down to the deepest point of our breath, or gently swallowing the object down into the very pit of our stomach. And once the bright object or the sense of warmth reaches that point at our abdomen, there's no need for us to move it anywhere else anymore. We maintain it gently with a feather-like touch at the very center of ourselves. If we find our awareness wandering away onto other things, sounds around us, distractions around us, each time we realize, we just bring our attention back again to the center of our body as before. The inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one. It's not a big deal. When we're new to meditation, we'll find our mind wanders often. But each time you bring it back, it'll become a little bit easier to keep it in place the next time round. Until before long, we'll find that our awareness is spending more time centered than it is wandering. At which point we'll start to have an intuitive feeling of the mind being able to stay at the center almost by second nature. As for the possible problem of there being thoughts in the mind, if the thoughts are at a low level, you can generally get away with just ignoring those thoughts. By not encouraging the thoughts, then we'll find that one thought will no longer lead to a second or a third, but it will die down into silence. For some of you, it may be that the thoughts don't just go away quite as easily as that, in which case you may need to take it to the next level by making use of that mantra, the thought blocking strategy I taught you earlier, which is to hear the sound of the words Sama Arahang or equivalent coming up as if you hear them like a silent music coming again from the source of the sound at the center of your body. Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang, Sama Arahang, over and over again, lightly, gently, continuously. Until at a certain point in your meditation, you'll start to find that the thoughts have died down. Or you may find yourself forgetting the mantra because it's not necessary to you anymore. So if that happens, then just be content to remain in silence with nothing but that inner object at the center of yourself. For those who are making progress, you'll start to find that even though you started out with a particular object, very similar to the one you planned to imagine, as the meditation progresses, the inner object will start to change on its own, maybe changing in shape, size, color, or intensity, still remaining at the center of yourself, but changing in its appearance. Some people experiencing this sort of thing imagine that they have somehow failed in the meditation, but on the contrary, it's a sign of progress. The mind starts to have enough calm for the inner object to change on its own. And what tends to happen is that as the inner object changes, then the byproduct is there's some subtle sort of unburdening of the mind along the way, where many of the things which were causing upset to the mind before, or just generally burdening or cluttering up the mind, are gradually let go of little by little, leaving nothing but the pure nature of the mind itself, a sense of clarity, a sense of transparency, a sense of inner radiance, a sense of wisdom, which is experienced as a deeper sort of understanding or gut feeling. Not thoughts from your head, but rather a sense of knowing that arises from within, as if you knew it all along, but had somehow overlooked it before now. So if we are able to practice meditation regularly, then it will increase the benefits experienced as a result of the meditation. Generally, what I recommend for those who feel that meditation is doing them some good is to try to find a little time each day to sit down in a quiet place where you're not going to be interrupted, at a time of the day when you feel enough energy not to fall asleep, and just meditate for 20 minutes, relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, focusing inwardly on your inner object, and using the mantra if necessary to overcome any thoughts in the mind. If you meditate each day, then you'll notice that little by little, your progress in the meditation will move gradually forward. Of course, there will be good days and bad days, but on that roller coaster of life, the general trend will be towards a more stable sense of happiness in your life and less reflexive response to the ups and downs of life around you. So although meditation is something which healthy people can practice, for those who are suffering from clinical conditions, maybe depression, stress, even ones that they are taking medication for, if they are able to practice meditation alongside their general treatment, then generally it will help their convalescence, help their prognosis. Because it's like, instead of just dealing with illness from the outside, you are actually helping your own case by working with the illness from the inside. There are some sorts of meditation where there are less than beneficial side effects, but most of these are to do with focusing outside of yourself, sorts of hypnotic fusions with meditation. But if you emphasize the center of the body down at the number 7, which I showed you earlier, then generally it's a very safe form of meditation, which a person, no matter what their mental health, can get some benefit from without any adverse side effects. So we sit just for a few more moments in silence, lightly, gently, keeping our mind on track at the center of our body by means of our inner object, keeping our mind free of thought by means of our mantra if necessary. And we continue to meditate in this way just for a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. Don't forget if your mind wanders away onto other things. Each time you realize, simply bring your attention back again to the center of your body as before. If the inner object disappears, you can think of a new one. Otherwise, remain gently at the center of yourself, using no more effort than you might use to thread a needle. Because gentleness is the best way to ensure progress in meditation. It's not by competing, it's not by thinking of the results of your meditation that we can make progress, but rather it's a more passive approach, allowing the mind to do its own work. And the more we open up a space for the mind to do that, then the more we will be rewarded by this practice. Sabba Buddhanupavena, Sabba Dhammanupavena, สัพพสังขานุภาเวนะสัทธาโสธีปะวันทุเท So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gently finishing your practice. So, to return to the subject of how we can transcend sensuality. As we've said, sensuality cannot be overcome by indulging in it or being content with it, because we never know enough of it. Also, surprisingly for some, sensuality cannot be overcome by repressing it. Have you ever seen the ascetics of India who sleep on a bed of nails? Did it ever occur to you why they would want to do that? Or starve themselves, or stand on one leg, or hold their breath, or clench their teeth, or stare at the sun, or engage in any other sort of self-mortification? Well, they think that by doing so they can overcome the sensuality of their bodies. In practice, though, the self-mortification practice weakens the physical health to the point that it feels as if there are no sensual desires left. However, sensuality remains dormant, and as soon as the body recovers its health, the sensuality wakes up again. It's like a heavy boulder placed on a tuft of grass, which would seem to kill the grass, but if you ever lift the boulder, you will notice that the grass is still there, but it's just become yellowed. As soon as you take away the boulder, the grass will grow back stronger than before. Thus, the ideal is not to repress sensuality, but to find a middle way between sensual indulgence and self-mortification. In the middle lies a breathing space whereby one can elevate one's mind toward higher forms of happiness. In a nutshell, the principle of overcoming sensuality is to elevate the quality of one's mind towards the supramundane level. In order to do this, we need to make an effort to sever the ties to sensual ways of thinking. We have to throw off the temptations of sensuality and also the temptations of satisfaction with limited meditation progress. In practice, you have to uptrade the attachments sequentially, and this point is rather difficult to understand. You don't give up everything all at once. It is more like having to change a train several times to get to your destination. You have to get out of one train before you can get into another. And you also need to wait for a new train to arrive before you can leave behind the old one. You cannot just jump out onto the tracks when there's no new train that has arrived. With the mind, it's the same. In order for the mind to escape a lower level, we need to build up a higher state of mind, ready and waiting to receive the outgoing mind. If you plan to remove sensual interest from the mind and you just try to sever the ties without anything by way of replacement, then you'll never succeed. The nature of the mind is to need something as the object of its attention. If you have no new, better object of interest as a replacement, then the mind will never give up its old ways. This is why you have to train yourself in meditation to the degree that you attain brightness within, before you can hope to sever the ties of sensual temptation. Your mind has to be completely absorbed in the happiness of meditation attainment before it will be able to give up the attachment derived from sensual temptation. It is like if you want to give up smoking and someone offers you chewing gum. Then when you're dying for a smoke, then it makes quitting smoking much more bearable. However, what would you think if you're trying to give up smoking cold turkey? You would soon relapse. Practical ways to loosen the bonds of sensuality in your life include learning to be content with your own husband or wife. It doesn't sound like a very big deal, but it appears to be more and more of a challenge these days that people would actually want to stay with the person who they started out loving until they grow old and gray together. Contentment with one's spouse will allow you to see deeper into your better half's character and love them for that. It's not exactly a sensual love anymore, but it's a love for the qualities in people which will take you beyond mere sensuality. Secondly, try not to be frivolous in the things that you do. For example, if you spend less time dressing up in front of the mirror, then it tends to make you less vulnerable to ridiculous trains of thought concerning sensuality. It'll also prevent you from having closets full of expensive clothes and shoes that you never wear. Thirdly, you can make better use of funerals to get a more accurate perspective on the value of your life, and this is a subject I will return to momentarily in the questions. Fourthly, you should avoid associating with the bohemian sorts of people of this world who tend to be very into sensual sort of things, whose thinking would otherwise tend to rub off on you. Fifthly, you need to learn to love yourself in an unselfish way. It doesn't mean inflating your ego as a result of love for yourself, but rather loving yourself for the qualities in yourself, seeing through to what is good in yourself and what you have to share with the world around you. Sixthly, you should practice loving kindness more. Seventh, you need to be persistent in keeping up a meditation practice throughout your life. This is a way of giving yourself perspective as to the different possible sources of happiness in life. Some people have so much to do that they just get too tired to have a relationship, especially when other people expect you to invest more time in a relationship than you have to offer. And lastly, have you ever heard of 8 precepts before? Well, you might have heard of 5 precepts before, but when we go on retreats or meditation, often we keep 8 precepts. And one of the extra precepts on top of the 5 precepts is that even though we might be in a relationship, but during the time when we're on a meditation retreat, we sleep separately. And one reason for this is that it helps your mind to focus more on your meditation practice, because you don't have to worry about being presentable or dressing up for your fellow retreatants. It takes quite a lot of clutter out of your mind, at least for the time that you're on your retreat. And this is another way which people can become more used to transcending sensuality. So, if we don't have a strong attachment in the first place, we have only a sort of fuzzy attachment where we can accept that it's going to be temporary from the beginning, then this can be the thing which saves us from experiencing the tragic downside of sensuality. There are 3 main benefits from practicing non-sensuality: reduction of associated defilements, a still mind, and sorrowlessness. In other words, you can avoid a lot of the byproducts of disappointment or obsession which potentially linger around things to do with sensuality. Your mind will certainly become still more easily because you have less things to clear out of your mind before you sit down for meditation. When you sit for meditation, you will no longer suffer from having the face of that person or this person popping up at your center in place of the shining sun. And when eventually you come to the time in your life when you are confronted by the inevitable old age or dying, you will be able to make your peace more easily because you have already accepted the transient nature of a lot of the attachments in your life as a result of having examined these things in advance. When you have to let go of things, it will be much easier than for miserly people who spend their life worrying who's going to look after their legacy or whether their house is going to be left in good hands, creating a source of irritation that leaves a dying person struggling instead of leaving this world in a dignified way. This is the reason why it's good to deal with your attachments to these things in advance. Unfortunately, such peace of mind does not come automatically as we get older in life. It needs to be cultivated. Non-attachment to sensuality thus helps you to be less afraid of dying because it's easier to let go if you feel you have less to lose. But I think for people who do feel they have a lot to lose, often they feel that way because a lot of the importance or the value which they credit themselves with comes down to merely what they had or what they were, perhaps their status symbols or their pre-retirement work position. As they realize that they're going to lose these things as they die, they feel resentment, anger, or bitterness. But if you've come to terms already with losing these things, then you're in a better position to confront inevitable aspects of the end of one's life. So, in conclusion, a bit like the meditator's attitude to liquor, where most people consider alcohol in moderation to be acceptable, but meditators prefer to avoid it completely, The same goes for sensuality, where meditators are best advised to avoid it completely. Failing that, try to use some of the suggestions I've given you to make sure sensuality does not become an all-consuming power in your life. So we turn now to answer the questions sent in by viewers last time, and this week the first question comes from Jane of Doncaster in England. Here comes the question. In the COVID era, how do you make your life feel relevant, especially if you have no work or family commitments? Hi Jane, and in answer to your question, I would like to reiterate some pandemic stress coping advice I heard from Laurie Santos, who is a professor of psychology at Yale University. She runs a happiness lab at her university with well-being classes that are currently being attended by more students than ever before. Here are some tips that she gave for us to boost our happiness. Apparently, some people's mechanisms for coping with COVID-related stress aren't necessarily that healthy. For many people, coping involves trying to run away from their emotions by increased use of social media or blindly clicking through Netflix. Scientific data, on the contrary, suggests that taking time to process your emotions and be with them can actually be a better way through them. Another ineffective strategy people often use is to complain. They like to gripe to their friends or complain on social media. However, again, scientific research has looked at happy people, and it suggests that complaining or avoiding emotions is not generally how happy people get through tough times. During challenging situations, it turns out that happy people really turn to their blessings in life. They are the sort of people who habitually look for the silver lining or think about what they are grateful for. If you are feeling down, you should look specifically for 3 to 5 things that make you feel good. You can shift your perspective from the bad stuff to the good stuff, and that has a positive consequence for your well-being. We've all heard the term post-traumatic stress, but in the research there's an equally powerful term, which is post-traumatic growth. The idea of post-traumatic growth is that after going through trauma, we end up stronger on the other side in a couple of important ways. One is that we develop more meaningful relationships. We feel more connected to people. The second is that we feel more resilient. We are like, hey, if we can get through the second wave of this pandemic, then maybe we can deal with bad news at work or a breakup, and it's no great biggie, right? The third thing is that we develop more meaning in life. The toll on society of the pandemic has demonstrated that life is fragile, and that reminds us to live in a way that we're really proud of. Those changes, that post-traumatic growth, is possible for many of us, and really we just need to embrace the right behaviors. Second question comes from Teresa of Los Angeles. Here comes the question. In your previous talk, you mentioned ways of implementing the antidote to greed. One of them is to recollect death to gain perspective on life. I know death is a topic that many people do not want to think about due to fear, but for me, the most effective way to overcome fear is to gain knowledge about that topic, because knowledge is power. Can you elaborate on Buddha's teaching on what happens after death? I am very curious about the perspective of death. Hi Teresa, I don't have time to go into the process of death on this particular live stream, which is also not aimed particularly at a Buddhist audience, but if any viewers are interested in the subject, they can read up for themselves in more detail by downloading Chapter 8 of the TDT 3026 text in the link you can see on the screen. For a more general audience, however, it is true that although funerals are considered a chore in the Western world, but in Buddhist countries it is a very different approach, and people spend a lot of their time enthusiastically going to funerals. It's not just burials they go to or the equivalent cremations, but they go for 7 days if a friend or a relative has died. They go every day in the evening to a funeral for a week until a deceased is cremated or buried. You might think that this is an incredible waste of time for people in a society where the roads get traffic jams with people going to funerals in the evening. Why would they have such a strong connection with death that they would want to go again and again to funerals? Well, the way those people justify time spent going to funerals is the way it awakens something in them as to the transience of their own lives. It is said that if, by going to a funeral, they can reflect more on their own luck in life that they're still alive, and to use their life as something beneficial, or reflect that they're not going to be alive forever, and because of that perspective on life, even the deceased gets a share of that positive thinking from the funeral attendee. It is at the foundation of a positive and a pragmatic psychology in that society, not a morbid one, but one where people level up to the reality that they're on this earth for a certain fleeting period of time, instead of fearing or denying death. So, if you find that you are still clinging onto your own proverbial corpse, being in contact with people who are much less fortunate than yourself, people who are sick, people who are suffering or recently deceased, it can help put your own thinking in perspective so that you can realize the value of what you have, so that you don't get stuck on the superficial aspects of life. In Buddhism, although people do cry at funerals, but I notice they cry less than in the Western world because they feel confident that all goodness which the person has exemplified throughout their life before they died will take them to a better place. So actually funerals can be quite uplifting occasions because they celebrate death as a potential transition from human life to something better. So let me finish up with a couple of news updates, one about the upcoming Katina ceremony and the temple at the temple, and the other, my usual PSA, about the availability of meditation teaching in English. This year, the abbot at the IMC has set the price of Katina funds at the especially low amount of $100 to make it accessible to all, irrespective of their income or lack of it in these unpredictable times. Of course, as $100 is not enough for you, you can donate several funds at once, or maybe dedicate donations in the names of friends or relatives. The Katina funds this year will be put towards the building of the 72nd anniversary meditation building, which is a golden opportunity for cultivating the merit of supporting the construction of permanent religious infrastructure. It will be a place that will serve the needs of the monastic and lay communities from all over the United States to come and meditate or perform religious activities together, with the aim of perpetuating the study of advanced Buddhist wisdom for thousands of years to come. The known merits of this sort of offering are to have an extended life expectancy, to gain easy access to the upper echelons of society, have a radiant complexion, inspiring of faith in others, and to be endowed with happiness both in body and mind, to be endowed with strength and energy, acuity, wisdom, ingenuity, and quick-wittedness, never to have cause to worry about wealth needed in the cultivation of philanthropy, to be loved and protected by humans and non-humans alike, to have a heavenly afterlife destination, ultimately entering upon nirvana. I should warn everyone in advance that since the 100-person public gathering rule for the state of California will still be in place on October 18th, unless you have been personally informed otherwise by temple staff, the best way to participate in Katina this year is to submit your name in advance to either Jenny or Crystal at the phone numbers on the Katina slide, and reserve yourself a place for Sunday morning of October the 18th. The numbers we receive in advance will help us with planning and preparation and safety matters. We now plan to have not 2 but 3 sittings for Katina ceremony this year of 100 persons each. 2 sittings will take place on the Sunday morning between 9 and 11 a.m. for the general congregation, and 1 on the Sunday afternoon will be by invitation only for the VIP benefactors. If it is not convenient for you to attend the temple in person, don't fret, as you can still make a donation, whether it is for Katina or the COVID Silver Lining Fund, by mailing checks to the temple address or by making a bank transfer. Online transfers can be made by Venmo or Zelle. The special merits arising for those practicing generosity in these times of adversity are that you will have a life Free of obstacles and danger, you will gain mastery of all forms of knowledge, prosper in your duties, have special insight into Dharma teachings, attain purity with ease, breaking free of the defilements in the mind. You'll also gain wealth on worldly, spiritual, and transcendental levels, allowing you to pursue perfections with ease all the way to the attainment of the utmost Dharma. The whole temple would like to rejoice in your merits on this occasion. Meditation is particularly valuable in this COVID era to help us cope with the dysphoria of the new normal. And in this respect, here at the temple, although there are still no face-to-face teaching sessions for the interim, you can access Dhamma teachings in English at the YouTube channel called Peace Point Meditation or the Facebook page of Peace Point Meditation, either live on Thursday evenings and Sunday mornings or on demand after the event. For those of you who have been following my talks, you may be interested to subscribe to a YouTube channel which I have recently set up in my own name, which can be found by searching for Prat Nicholas Thanissaro on YouTube, where I have systematized my own teachings and cut them down to the bare essentials. Meanwhile, Peace Breaks are broadcast every evening between 7 and 8 p.m. from Friday to Wednesday. For the benefit of families listening in, there's also a special show for children in English known as Shining Stars, which goes out between 7:30 and 8 p.m. every Monday evening with bedtime stories and a meditation short enough to keep the attention of younger listeners. Outside of the live streams and on-demand programming, there's also the MindGem app, which you can download for free, allowing you to listen to meditation and Dhamma talks in English on your cell phone even when you are offline. As for the usual ceremony for receiving offerings at the temple gate, we are back to normal with monks in place between 9:30 and 11 a.m. each morning, and monks conversant in English on Saturdays and Wednesdays, seeing as the air quality has now returned more or less to normal. So this session we have looked at the topic of cultivating transcendental states of mind in order to overcome sensuality and craving. For my next online session with you, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning and a week on Thursday evening, we'll be moving on to look at the subject of generosity as an antidote to stinginess. For good measure, I would like to remind viewers that even better than posting thank you or great talk or sadhu in the broadcast comments, you can email your questions about meditation or what you've heard in the lecture to the address peacetime.questions@gmail.com, as you can see spelled out in the slide. And I will do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to stay healthy, avoid recklessness or complacency in the face of the virus, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Try to keep up with the escalation of craving and sensuality in your mind and develop ways to transcend it. So for today, this is me, Prat Nicholas, signing off for this session. So long, folks, and stay safe.